Hello everyone. I'm going to be talking about walking, or talking about Salisbury and walking with a sense of love, respect, mystery, wonder, delight, and a singing heart. This image is just an example of how I find nature present with me in some deep and beautiful way. It was taken in my garden the morning of the day I did my first practice for this talk. And I've never before seen a sunrise like it from here. So despite, or perhaps particularly through this pandemic, I feel so much held in a world that's alive and responding with love. I'd like to show how for me that's come to be and how it's helped me develop a special relationship with nature, with rivers, with Salisbury and with a cathedral. And to do that, I need to set a little bit of background, both for Salisbury and for myself, and how I've come to engage with this special place in the way I do. It has to do with an awareness of suffering and a need for healing, as well as delight in the world behind the surface that's so beautiful, intricate in its details and timing, creative, abundant, loving and playful. Salisbury feels almost like a stage where these two aspects of life are worked out. So, first of all, Salisbury. Where does she sit in terms of the sacred landscape of this area and its waterways, which were part of what made the whole area such a spiritual centre 5,000 or 6,000 years ago, and maybe before? As you can see, Amesbury is 30 miles away, Stonehenge 9 miles, and Old Sarum, which has slipped a bit on this map, is just 2 miles from the cathedral, which sits at the confluence of 3 rivers. So Salisbury and her cathedral were conceived in Old Sarum at the turn of the 12th and beginning of the 13th century. The site isn't as ancient a centre as Stonehenge and Amesbury. It was first developed as a hill fort in the Iron Age about 450 BCE. When the Romans arrived, they spotted it as an excellent strategic site and as a garrison and administrative centre. The site enlarged and spread down the hill, and in the way of imperialist powers, they also renamed the hill fort Sorvio Dunum. And here you can see the impact of the Romans on the landscape, one of straight lines and dominance rather than a subtle relationship with the land and her rivers. The Romans came with a very different sort of language and way of thinking, which has philosophically predominated almost ever since. At that time, Salisbury wasn't even on the map. And then during the Anglo-Saxon period from around 410 to 1066, Old Sarum diminished in its importance, but remained a centre which worked in cooperation with Wilton, just 3 miles northwest of modern-day Salisbury, which over that period became the capital of a much larger region known as Wessex. So here you can see the layout of Old Sarum quite clearly. The Normans also spotted it as a great military and administrative centre. They built the inner ditch and motte, and at one time both the church and the army were housed in the centre area. Then in 1075, permission was granted to build a cathedral in the Outer Bailey. You can just see it there in the right-hand corner. There was a brief period of flourishing and scholarship and religious innovation, but the cathedral was ill-fated and struck by lightning almost as soon as it was built. It was rebuilt, but conditions worsened for the clergy at Old Sarum, and a mixture of inclement weather due to its exposed position, overcrowding of the space, and problems with the soldiers who sometimes extorted money and so on. Eventually permission was granted by the Pope to relocate the cathedral to the valley where the then bishop owned much of the land. As I was preparing this presentation, this photograph from last year's Pilgrims Weekend flyer suddenly popped up on my phone and then vanished again. I didn't recognise the image, and at first surprised glance saw the Sword and Grail cup as an anchor, which I'm sure is another way of looking at them, as together they bring grounding, balance and flexible stability. a marriage of heaven and earth that leads to abundance and joy. I feel this is a key symbol and one that you may find resonating in the cathedral today. At that pilgrimage weekend, we came to Old Sarum and did a little healing ceremony at this beautiful ancient beach, where I was encouraged to say or sing the prayer that has become so important to me and which I'll refer to later. I'm beginning to develop a connection with this tree now and find I'm experiencing so many delightful synchronicities around it. So let's travel down the hill and through time to Salisbury. I think you can see the attraction the valley and her rivers may have held. Her cathedral is named after the Blessed Virgin Mary. I think this Elizabeth Frink statue hints that there's something special and a bit unusual about Salisbury, beyond the very traditional first impressions. A spirit willing to stride out in inner strength and peace and following a vision. The city was originally built at the same time as the cathedral, according to a checker plan that's still visible in the layout of the medieval city centre streets. That period is still evoked in some of her street names: Rampart Road, Fish Row, Ox Row, and Penny Farthing Street, to name but a few. So the cathedral is sited in a wonderful gated close, surrounded by lawns and edged by beautiful historic buildings. It's perhaps an echo of an improvement on the protection the previous cathedral had experienced within the old hill fort. The gates are still locked at 11 p.m. This spaciousness around the cathedral has allowed it to flourish as a site for sculpture exhibitions and community events. So Salisbury has a lot of ancient and medieval history, but in March 2018, it was the stage for some very dramatic and shocking recent history. I took this photograph to send to my son when I came into Salisbury a day or two after what we soon learned were the Novichok poisonings. Within a day or two, Salisbury had become the centre of a dark and surreal drama. I didn't take any more photos. I think along with most of Salisbury, I was just in a state of shock. Eventually, and after the sad death on the 8th of July of just one person, whose name extraordinarily was Dawn, the clean-up operation was completed and things gradually returned to normal. This is the Maltings, where the Skripals fell ill, and you can see Salisbury trying to maintain her sense of identity in the face of the trauma that had befallen her with the poisonings. It's also the place where the mess from the bench was washed into the river, which is behind this screen. For months after the event, a terrible emptiness and stunned silence fell over this area, and there were no children in the playground, which is off to the left. It was that event and concern for the river that prompted a fellow gatekeeper friend and I to start blessing the rivers of Salisbury with the intention to bring healing and peace. At this point, I need to backtrack a bit to explain how I've come to engage with the land as I do. In 2010, I underwent a period of massive loss. Everything fell away at once, as sometimes happens in life. But at the same time, I was in a sense given 3 gifts or seeds to pay attention to and nourish. Each one has a story that I can't go into now, but it's these 3 things that support me now in my intent to heal, bless and nourish the rivers and land. So there's my wonderful ancient Tibetan water blessing bowl, my voice, a journey in itself, and a gift of the treasure of India, a reconnection with my breath, like a little bird I could hold in my cupped hands. And a prayer, Abunda Bashamaya. These words are Aramaic, the root language of both Arabic and Hebrew. One possible translation of this could be Father, Mother, birther of abundance, from the realms of everlasting light. I'll say a few words about this wonderful prayer. It's what's normally called the Lord's Prayer or Our Father. Aramaic, the language Jesus, or rather Yeshua, would have spoken it in, is a poetic language in which words have many layers of meaning, and the seed sounds have an embodied vibration and meaning in themselves. So they calm and enliven our own bodies, as well as calming and enlivening the water of the earth and other beings. Sacred words spoken in Sanskrit have a similar healing and nourishing effect, but this feels like restoring the healthy roots of our own tradition, with possibilities for healing and nourishment on many levels. It's about a process and a holistic worldview, not a dogma, and has become my anchor gradually, day and night. I'm finding the whole prayer increasingly miraculous in its synchronistic and beneficial effects and timings. These have included, on the Lions Gate Day of the 8th of August 2017, a pink rainbow appearing over a hill where I just serendipitously met with a friend and quietly chanted this prayer while she chanted a prayer in Sanskrit. Actually, later the next day, we discovered we were actually sitting opposite the Westbury White Horse. We couldn't sit because of the mist that day, or that evening. And then on the 8th of August 2019, when I happened to be staying in Pitlochry in Scotland, I went to a place called the Hermitage near Mount Schiehallion. I quietly sang the prayer and sounded my water blessing bowl in a lovely domed space. I afterwards immediately stepped out onto a little viewing balcony beside this waterfall and saw 3 salmon leap up the fall. One other didn't quite make it on that attempt, and I hope it tried again. This was a very rare event and out of the salmon leaping season. So when I was wondering how I might tell my story and describe how I walk with a sense of love, mystery, respect, wonder and delight, such that engaging with nature in that way has become my greatest pleasure, I thought I'd again visit the river at the place I'd visited daily during the first lockdown. I felt a bit concerned that I'd neglected it and not been there for several months, but I needn't have worried. The little clearing still had a very special energy. I greeted the guardian tree and the spirit of the place and went to stand by the river. When I started to sing the Algonquin water song, something I've now also started to do when I'm near water, translated it means water is the lifeblood of our mother, the earth. Water is the lifeblood of our own bodies. A little robin came and sat on the stump sticking out of the water beside me. It didn't want to be photographed, and I wonder if that was because I had forgot to ask it. I'm not always as mindful as I might be. But then, as I started quietly singing the Aramaic prayer, a swan appeared flying directly overhead and calling out with a sound something like a bugle. It was magical. I bade my farewell to the special place and continued my walk. And on my return, I saw a flock of wild geese flying in formation over the fields on the other side of the river. The whole walk and the contrast in the seasons from spring when this photo was taken and summer to late autumn was fabulous. So there was a joyful thank you, thank you, thank you bubbling away in my heart as I walked home. I also took it as confirmation that I was doing the right thing in giving this talk. I'll just show you a few photographs from the water blessings after the Novichok poisonings. This was the first water blessing that we did, and although it's beautiful, this image doesn't quite capture the way that all of nature seemed to be dancing. Perhaps you can get a sense of it more in this one. And then here are some images from during the first lockdown. I walked to the river every day and quietly sang the Algonquin water song and I've wound to the river. It was such a nourishing and delightful experience for me, and just the right distance as I had a problem with my ankle and couldn't walk more than a mile or so then. This was the river from the opposite bank after blessing it on Easter Sunday. I think you can see something special appearing in the water which will be flowing on down to the cathedral, whose foundations stand in water. And this photo was taken in March. It's not often you see a swan visibly straining to paddle against the flow. It was like that in March. And it was lovely because this summer, the whole area along the river, just a little above here, had such a happy atmosphere with families and small groups of young people wild swimming and enjoying nature. I'd never seen that before. There was also a family of swans, maybe these two, with 5 cygnets in the maltings. There was even an amusing and auspicious late-night visit by an otter caught on a security camera in the high street just before midnight. So now we'll journey back downstream and to the cathedral, as it's such a vital part of Salisbury and one I'm coming to love and delight in. About 2 years ago, some sound healer friends, who are also instrument makers, were commissioned to make a tubular bell. It now stands in the Trinity Chapel at the eastern end of the cathedral, on the right-hand side, beneath the famous Prisoner of Conscience window. There's a large wrought iron amnesty candle balancing it on the left hand. I understand this bell stands on, or very close to, the ancient sacred site that predates the cathedral. The bell speaks through its form of balance, flow and beauty, although this photograph doesn't really do it justice. And it has a wonderful, soft, rich, strong, deep tone that anyone is at liberty to sound using the padded mallet that sits in the frame, as you can see in the picture. So here, the suffering and hope of light in the darkness of the political world, and the flow of life and light in the land and the water beneath the suffering, sit each on either side. I'll say a little bit more about the sculpture exhibited in the cathedral, as it seems also very much part of the wonderful synchronicities of life and the spirit of the healing arts. During the Novichok crisis, by chance of timing, there was here a perfect display entitled Les Colombes. As you can see, there were great long strings of origami peace doves flying in the cathedral, and unusually the exhibition was participatory, visitors being given the origami instructions and paper and encouraged to make doves themselves. So at that time, when the dark politics of the world were putting Salisbury at risk and the poisonings were being described as an act of war, Salisbury herself was full of peace doves in shops, cafes, schools, village halls and house windows. Then, when Extinction Rebellion held their first gathering in the market square here early in the summer last year, I felt moved to support their concern and distress for the earth by going to the cathedral. After attending the early morning communion service held here daily in the Trinity Chapel ever since it was built, you can imagine my stunned surprise when, as I walked back through the body of the cathedral, there in the space beneath the great spire that reaches heavenward and whose foundations and roots stand on the water gravel of the river, was hanging suspended a huge sculpture of the earth, whose exhibit name I learned is Gaia, a transformational name. The earth regarded as a living being infused with the light and light of heaven and held in this space. This, I soon realised, was preparation for the beginning of Salisbury International Arts Festival. And then finally, later this summer, whilst on a walk into Salisbury in the Close, I had the extraordinary delight of sitting in the shade of a tree, taking a rest and absorbing the view of this wonderful Henry Moore reclining figure sculpture, watching the light playing on it, with one of the most beautiful cathedrals in the world in the background. At that time, there was a sign in the river, just where the two main rivers join near the cathedral. It said, "Nothing is impossible." And for me, that encapsulates my sense of loving the land and my joy and delight in pilgrimage that has grown over the past few years. So I'll just take you home now and back to my garden to finish our walk through time and around Salisbury. I hope you've enjoyed it and this beautiful late afternoon November sky. And I'd just like to say a couple of thank yous. First to you for listening, and second to John Chandler for permission to use the 2 maps from his wonderful book, Salisbury History Around Us. Thank you.